Silverware clattered against porcelain plates. Laughter filled every corner of our dining room. I watched my mother, Marjorie, lift a spoonful of my homemade stew to her lips. She took one taste, and her face twisted into disgust. Before I could react, she spit it back into the bowl. "This tastes like punishment," she sneered, pushing the bowl away. "You actually call this food?" The whole table erupted in laughter. My father shook his head slowly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Maybe you should stick to flipping burgers at some fast food joint," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. My throat tightened. My vision blurred with hot tears I refused to let fall. My own mother, sitting there in front of our cousins and neighbors, had just turned my dream into a public joke. She looked around the table, feeding off their laughter like it gave her strength. "Face it, Liam," she said with a smirk that would haunt me for years. "Cooking isn't for real men. It's embarrassing." The laughter grew louder, echoing in my head. That was the night everything changed. That was the night I stopped craving her approval. My name is Liam Crow, and that dinner destroyed the last piece of me that still wanted to belong to this family. After everyone left, I locked myself in the kitchen. The silence pressed against my ears after all that cruel laughter. My hands shook as I poured the ruined stew down the drain, watching it disappear like my hope. Through the thin walls, I could still hear her muffled voice in the living room. "He actually thought he could cook like a professional," she said, and someone laughed with her. That sound became fuel for something dark inside me. I gripped the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white. The cold metal grounded me as rage replaced shame. I stared at my reflection in the window above the sink, barely recognizing the broken person staring back. "One day, you'll eat my food again, Mom," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "And you'll choke on your pride." The words hung in the air like a promise. I didn't know how or when, but I knew this wouldn't be the end of my story. This would be the beginning. I wiped down the counters with methodical precision, each stroke erasing evidence of my failure. But I wasn't erasing my dream. I was protecting it from her poison. From that moment, I decided to hide my passion from her judging eyes. I would cook in secret, learn in shadows, and return only when I was undeniable. The kitchen became my sanctuary that night, even as her laughter still echoed through the walls. I was 10 years old when I first learned what her love really meant. It was her birthday, and I had spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen, determined to surprise her. I mixed batter, measured ingredients with a child's careful concentration, and decorated a lopsided chocolate cake with pink frosting. My hands were covered in flour and food coloring, but I was so proud. When she came home, I presented it to her with the biggest smile. "Happy birthday, Mom. I made this for you." She looked at the cake, then at me, and something cold flickered in her eyes. She cut a slice, took a small bite, and frowned deeply. The silence stretched out forever as she chewed slowly, deliberately. Then she set down her fork. "Sweetheart," she said in that syrupy voice she used before delivering cruelty, "some people are born with talent. You're not one of them." She picked up the entire cake and walked to the trash can. I watched, frozen, as she dumped it in without hesitation. My father came up behind her and patted her shoulder, chuckling like they shared a private joke. Neither of them looked at me standing there with flour still on my cheek. That was the first time my heart truly broke. That was when I learned that love in this house always came wrapped in mockery. In high school, I volunteered to cook for a fundraiser. The entire school was excited, and for once, I thought I could prove myself publicly. I spent days planning the menu, practicing recipes, dreaming of their faces when they tasted something good. But Marjorie had other plans. The morning of the event, she switched the salt and sugar containers in my prep station. I didn't notice until it was too late. People bit into cookies and brownies and immediately spit them out. Their faces twisted in confusion and disgust. The laughter started small, then spread through the gymnasium like wildfire. And there she was, laughing louder than anyone. Her voice carried across the crowd as she wiped tears from her eyes. "I told him he couldn't cook," she announced to everyone nearby. My humiliation became the town's gossip for weeks. Kids at school asked me why I bothered trying. Teachers looked at me with pity. But the worst part was going home that night and seeing her smile, knowing she had sabotaged me deliberately. She never admitted it, But I saw the truth in her eyes. I stopped cooking publicly after that. But I didn't stop cooking. Late at night, after the diner closed, I would sneak in through the back door. The old chef, Rudy, would be there waiting, ready to teach me everything he knew. Rudy was different from anyone in my family. He saw the pain behind my determination and never asked questions that would make me relive it. Instead, he showed me how to turn that pain into something beautiful on a plate. "You cook like someone who's trying to prove he deserves to exist," he said one night, watching me dice vegetables with intense focus. His words hit deeper than he probably meant them to. That's exactly what I was doing. Every knife cut, every perfectly timed flip of the pan, every sauce reduction was proof that I mattered. That I had value beyond what my mother said. Rudy taught me technique, patience, and presentation. He showed me how professional kitchens worked, how to manage heat and time and flavor. But more importantly, he showed me that cooking could be respected. That chefs could be artists. That my dream wasn't foolish. I never told my family about these secret lessons. I wanted to disappear completely, work in silence, and return one day as someone they couldn't ignore. Not with words or arguments, but with undeniable legacy. Rudy believed in that plan. "Keep your head down and your knives sharp," he would say. "Success is the best revenge, kid." I held on to those words like a lifeline. They kept me going through every shift, every burned hand, every exhausted night when I questioned if any of this was worth it. At 24, I was still working at the diner when Marjorie decided to publicly disown my life choices. It happened at a family gathering, with aunts and uncles and cousins all watching. She stood up during dinner and made an announcement like she was giving a toast. "I'm embarrassed by Liam," she declared, looking around the table for support. "He's 24 years old and still working at a greasy diner. When will you grow up?" I tried to defend myself, tried to explain that I was learning, that I had plans. She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Either get a real job or stop showing up to these dinners," she said coldly. "I can't keep explaining why my son is a failure." The table went quiet for a heartbeat, then someone laughed nervously, and others joined in. They always laughed. It was easier than defending me. My father nodded in agreement, as he always did. My siblings looked away, as they always did. Nobody stood up for me. Nobody ever did. I sat there feeling my face burn with shame and rage mixed together. But underneath that, something cold and determined settled into my chest. I smiled at her across the table. "Okay, Mom," I said quietly. "This will be the last dinner I attend as your failure." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I packed my few belongings into 2 bags. My knives, carefully wrapped in cloth, went in first. They were the most valuable things I owned. Then clothes, some books, and finally a single photo of my grandmother. She had died when I was 12, but she was the only person in this family who ever praised my cooking. I left a note on the fridge door. My hand shook as I wrote the words, "Someday, you'll remember my name differently." I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I just walked out into the night rain, letting it soak through my jacket as I made my way to the bus station. The weight of my bags felt good on my shoulders. They were heavy with possibility, not shame. As the bus pulled away from my hometown, I watched the lights fade in the rearview window. Every mile that passed felt like shedding skin. I was leaving behind the person they tried to make me into. The failure. The embarrassment. The joke. Somewhere out there was a version of myself I hadn't met yet. A version who cooked with confidence, who earned respect, who built something beautiful from all this pain. I was going to find that person, no matter how long it took. The rain kept falling as we drove through the darkness toward the city. The city was brutal. I slept on couches belonging to strangers I met through kitchen connections. Sometimes I slept in the storage rooms of restaurants where I worked. I washed dishes until my hands cracked and bled. I burned myself on hot pans and grills, collecting scars like badges of honor. I worked in kitchens nobody noticed, the kind that fed drunk college students at 3 in the morning. The chefs there cursed more than they breathed, screaming orders in multiple languages. The heat was suffocating. The hours were endless. The pay was terrible. But I was learning. Every night, I absorbed new techniques, new flavors, new ways of combining ingredients. I worked prep stations, then moved to salads, then appetizers. Slowly, I climbed the invisible ladder that existed in every kitchen. Every insult from an angry head chef reminded me of my mother's voice. And somehow, that made me work harder. When someone screamed that my sauce was garbage, I heard her sneering that I had no talent. When someone threw a plate at the wall because I overcooked pasta, I remembered her dumping my birthday cake in the trash. Every new recipe I mastered felt like taking back one stolen piece of pride. My hands learned to move with precision and speed. My palate developed beyond what I thought possible. I was becoming exactly what she said I could never be. 5 years into my city exile, I was working at a mid-level restaurant when something extraordinary happened. A top food critic visited anonymously, as they always do. None of us knew she was there until it was too late. The head chef was out that night, and I was running the kitchen. I prepared my signature risotto, the recipe I had perfected through thousands of attempts. I stirred in butter and parmesan at exactly the right moment, tasted it 3 times, and sent it out when it was perfect. The next morning, a glowing review appeared online. The critic praised the risotto specifically, calling it transcendent and evidence of a true artist in the kitchen. The restaurant owner called a meeting and took full credit for everything. He never mentioned my name. But I didn't care about the recognition. I cared that I was good now. Undeniably, professionally, legitimately good. That night, I walked home through the cold city streets and looked up at the stars between the buildings. She'd never believe this, I whispered to the sky, smiling for the first time in months. Something was building inside me. A plan was taking shape. I wasn't ready yet, but I was getting close. Close to the moment when I could face her again, not as her failure, but as her reckoning. The phone call came 3 months after that review. I almost didn't answer when I saw Mom's name on the screen. We hadn't spoken in years. My heart hammered in my chest as I pressed the answer button. "Your sister's getting married," Marjorie said without greeting. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, sharp and cold. "Congratulations to her," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. "The wedding needs catering," she continued. There was a long pause, and I felt hope rising despite myself. Was she about to ask me to cook? Was this her way of apologizing? "You want me to cook for it?" I asked carefully. "Oh no," she laughed, that same cruel laugh from my childhood. "We hired a real caterer. We just need someone to carry trays and serve drinks. You're good at that kind of thing, right? Serving people." The line went dead before I could respond. She hung up on me. My hand trembled as I lowered the phone, staring at the blank screen. The old wound ripped open fresh and bleeding. After everything, after all these years, I was still just a joke to her. But instead of breaking me, something hardened in my chest. This wasn't pain anymore. This was fuel. Pure, focused, burning fuel. I knew exactly what I had to do next. 2 months later, a kitchen accident nearly destroyed everything I had built. A grease fire erupted during a busy dinner service. I was right next to it when it happened. The flames caught my arm before I could move away, and the pain was immediate and excruciating. The burns were severe enough that I couldn't work for months. I sat in my tiny apartment wearing bandages, watching my savings disappear, wondering if this was the universe telling me to give up. The scars on my arm would be permanent, the doctor said. Just like the scars my mother had left on my heart. During those long, painful days of recovery, I heard her voice in my head constantly. "Cooking isn't for real men." The words played on repeat, mocking me from memory. I stared at my bandaged arm and felt despair creeping in. But then something shifted. Instead of breaking, I started sketching restaurant ideas on napkins and scrap paper. Floor plans. Menu concepts. Names. If I couldn't be in someone else's kitchen right now, maybe it was time to build my own. "Maybe I don't need anyone's kitchen," I said out loud to my empty apartment. "Maybe I'll build my own empire." The idea grew from a whisper to a roar. By the time my bandages came off, I had designed an entire restaurant in my mind. All I needed was funding and courage. I started volunteering at a rehabilitation center, cooking meals for patients recovering from various injuries and illnesses. It felt right, using food to help people heal. The patients loved my cooking, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something purely good. One afternoon, a man in an expensive suit showed up at the center. His name was Vincent Torres, and he was visiting his mother who was recovering from surgery. He tasted the meal I had prepared that day, a simple roasted chicken with herb vegetables and homemade bread. After finishing, he asked to meet the chef. When I came out, still wearing my apron, he studied me with intense interest. "This food has soul," he said directly. "Who taught you to cook like this?" I told him about Rudy, about working in kitchens across the city, about learning from pain and persistence. I didn't mention my mother. That story was too raw to share with strangers. "I'm an investor," Vincent said, handing me his business card. "I fund restaurants for talented chefs who need backing. I want to invest in you, but only if you run the place yourself. Full creative control." My heart stopped. This was the opportunity one had been building toward. But I wasn't ready to attach my real name to it yet. I needed protection, anonymity, one more layer between me and my mother's judgment. "I'll do it," I said. "But under a business alias. LC Culinary." Naming the restaurant was the most important decision I would make. I needed something that sounded warm and inviting, something that would draw people in. Something that would haunt my mother when she finally learned the truth. "Marjorie's Table," I said out loud, testing how it sounded. Vincent looked at me curiously. "Your mother's name?" "Something like that," I replied, not explaining further. The name was perfect for so many reasons. To everyone else, it would sound like a tribute, a love letter to a beloved mother who inspired her son's passion for cooking. They would imagine a warm, nurturing woman who taught her boy everything about food and family. Only I would know the truth. That Marjorie's Table was named after the woman who tried to kill my dreams at every dinner, who mocked and sabotaged and humiliated me until I fled. The irony was beautiful. I would build my success on her name, turning her cruelty into my foundation. Every time someone complimented the restaurant name, every time someone assumed I was honoring a wonderful mother, I would smile and let them believe the myth. The truth was mine alone to hold. "Marjorie's Table it is," Vincent said, shaking my hand. "Let's build something incredible." We signed the papers that afternoon. 6 months later, construction began. My dream was becoming real, built on the ashes of her mockery. Opening night arrived like a storm of nerves and excitement. I had poured everything into this restaurant. Every dish on the menu had been tested hundreds of times. The decor was elegant but welcoming. The staff was trained to perfection. Critics came, their identities hidden among regular diners. I watched from the kitchen as plates went out and came back empty. The sound of satisfied conversation drifted through the dining room. This was happening. This was really happening. The reviews started appearing within days. 5 stars. Glowing descriptions of the food, the atmosphere, the attention to detail. One critic called Marjorie's Table a love letter to family and forgiveness. Another wrote, "This is food that remembers home, even if you've never been there." I smiled privately every time I read those words. If only they knew what this place really represented. If only they understood that every beautiful dish was cooked with the fuel of remembered cruelty. On the wall near the entrance, I hung a single old photograph in an expensive frame. It showed a family dinner from years ago, the night she first mocked my cooking publicly. Guests would stop to look at it, thinking it was a sweet memory. None of them noticed the pain in my young eyes in that photo. This was my revenge, served on fine china with impeccable presentation. 3 months after opening, a food blogger discovered my story. Not the whole truth, just the surface narrative of a young chef who left home to pursue his dreams and succeeded. She wrote a piece titled, "The Chef Who Turned Pain into Art," without knowing my real identity or connection to the restaurant's namesake. The post went viral overnight. Thousands of shares, comments, people calling me inspiring. News outlets picked it up. Suddenly, Marjorie's Table wasn't just a successful restaurant, it was a symbol of perseverance. That's when Marjorie called. The first time in 6 years that she initiated contact. "Liam." Her voice sounded strange on the phone, almost uncertain. "I saw an article about a restaurant called Marjorie's Table. Did you open a restaurant named after me?" Her tone dripped with pride she had never earned. She wanted to claim this success, to tell her friends that her son had honored her with this tribute. The irony made me want to laugh and scream simultaneously. "Yes, Mom," I said simply, giving nothing away. "I opened a restaurant called Marjorie's Table." "I always knew you had it in you," she lied smoothly. "I'd love to visit soon." "I'll send you an invitation for a special private dinner," I told her. "Bring the whole family." She agreed enthusiastically, already planning her grand entrance. She had no idea what was coming. The invitation went out on expensive cardstock. A private dinner event for my family, hosted at Marjorie's Table. The message was formal and gracious, exactly what they would expect from a successful chef trying to reconnect. They all accepted immediately. My mother, father, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins. Everyone who had laughed at that terrible dinner years ago would be here. Everyone who had watched her humiliate me and said nothing. Marjorie bought a new dress and pearls for the occasion. She told everyone in her social circle about her talented son's restaurant. She practiced her modest smile in the mirror, preparing to accept praise for my success as if she had nurtured it all along. The night of the dinner, they arrived in expensive cars, dressed like they were attending a gala. Cameras flashed as food bloggers and local media gathered outside. Marjorie posed for photos, her hand on her pearls, smiling like a proud mother. I watched from the kitchen, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. I personally prepared her meal, a special dish I created just for this night. I named it Bitterness and Bloom. The menu card on her plate explained it was inspired by complicated family relationships, how pain can transform into something beautiful when given enough time. She read the description and smiled, completely missing the meaning. She never was good at reading between the lines. After everyone finished eating and the wine was flowing freely, Vincent stood up to make a speech. We had planned this moment carefully, rehearsed the timing. The room fell silent as he tapped his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vincent began, his voice carrying through the dining room, "thank you for joining us tonight at Marjorie's Table. This restaurant represents something special, a dream realized against impossible odds." My mother beamed, her hand still on her pearls. "It is my honor to introduce the founder and head chef of this establishment," Vincent continued. "A man who built this success from nothing, who turned his passion into art despite facing tremendous obstacles. Ladies and gentlemen, Chef Liam Crow." The audience gasped as I walked out from the kitchen. Cameras flashed. People whispered to each other, connecting the dots. Marjorie's smile froze on her face as I stepped into the spotlight. I looked directly at her across the crowded room. Her face had gone pale, her hand clutching those pearls like a lifeline. "I wanted the world to taste the lessons you fed me, Mom," I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Every dish in this restaurant is cooked with memories of what you taught me about hunger." The room erupted in confused applause, not understanding the full weight of my words. But she understood. I saw it in her eyes. After the guests left, after the cameras stopped flashing, Marjorie stormed into the kitchen. Her careful makeup was smudged now, her composure shattered. The staff had gone home, and it was just us in the gleaming space where I had built my empire. "You humiliated me," she screamed, her voice raw with rage. "You made me look like a monster in front of everyone." I kept my back to her, calmly cleaning my workstation. My hands were steady as I wiped down the counter, the same hands she said would never create anything worthwhile. "You humiliated yourself, Mom," I said quietly, turning to face her. "I didn't make you a monster. I just served your words back to you on a plate you couldn't refuse." She moved quickly, her hand cracking across my face. The slap echoed in the empty kitchen. My cheek burned where her palm connected. For a moment, we both stood frozen, her breathing hard, me completely still. "You can't hurt me anymore," I said, my voice steady despite the stinging pain. "That's what you never understood. Every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every time you tried to destroy my dreams, you just made me stronger." She stared at me, and I saw something I had never seen before. Tears formed in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of someone who finally realized what they had lost. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My siblings started fighting among themselves, arguing about who knew what and when. My sister claimed she always supported me privately. My brother said he tried to defend me once but gave up. They were rewriting history, trying to distance themselves from our mother's cruelty. My father left the event early that night, too ashamed to face me. He sent a text message days later, "I should have stopped her." It was the closest he ever came to an apology. Family friends began cutting ties with Marjorie. The viral blog post had been updated with more details about my story. People learned how she sabotaged my high school fundraiser, how she mocked my childhood birthday cake, how she called me a failure at 24. The comments sections filled with anger directed at her. Her social circle collapsed within weeks. The same women who used to have lunch with her stopped returning calls. The country club where she played tennis suddenly had scheduling conflicts. She was experiencing the isolation she had made me feel for years. But I never gloated. I never gave interviews trashing her. I never added fuel to the fire. I simply kept cooking, kept running my restaurant, kept building my success. My silence was more powerful than any revenge speech could have been. Marjorie's name meant something different now. It meant my triumph, not her cruelty. That transformation was revenge enough. A journalist from a major food magazine requested an interview 6 months later. We sat in the empty restaurant during the afternoon lull, sunlight streaming through the windows. She asked thoughtful questions about my journey, my techniques, my inspiration. Finally, she asked the question everyone wanted to know: why use your mother's name for the restaurant after everything she did? I thought carefully about my answer. This would be quoted everywhere, become part of my public story. I needed to get it exactly right. Because forgiveness tastes better when it's plated beautifully, I said, smiling at the metaphor. I could have named this place anything. But calling it Marjorie's Table forced me to transform my pain into something that feeds people, nourishes them, brings them joy. The journalist scribbled notes quickly. So it's an act of forgiveness. It's complicated, I replied honestly. It's forgiveness and vindication and reclamation all at once. Every time someone has a beautiful meal here, they're tasting proof that she was wrong about me. The interview went viral within hours of publication. The clip of me talking about forgiveness was shared across social media. People called me the Forgiving Chef, a title that made me uncomfortable because it wasn't quite accurate. But I let them call me whatever they wanted. Only I knew the full truth of what Marjorie's Table really meant. 8 months after the confrontation, Marjorie visited the restaurant alone. She came during off hours, when no other customers were present. She wore no makeup, no pearls, just a simple coat against the cold weather. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly when I came out from the kitchen. We sat in a corner booth, the same booth I had specifically designed to have a view of the entire restaurant. I wanted her to see what I built, what I created from the ashes of her mockery. "I didn't know I was that cruel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was just being honest with you, preparing you for disappointment." I listened without comforting her. That was her burden to carry, not mine to ease. "I've been thinking about that birthday cake," she continued. "You were 10 years old, and I threw away something you made with love. What kind of mother does that?" "The kind of mother you were," I answered simply. "Mom, I cooked for love. You served me shame. We just had different recipes for what family meant." She cried then, real tears that ran down her cheeks. She apologized, though the words felt hollow after so many years. Some wounds don't heal just because someone finally says sorry. She left shortly after, walking out into the cold. I watched her go, feeling nothing but emptiness where anger used to live. I kept a reserved table in my restaurant after that night. Table 7, positioned perfectly near the window with a view of the street. Every night, that table remained empty, untouched, with a single place setting. Customers began asking about it within weeks. "Why don't you seat anyone there?" they would ask. Regular diners started noticing the pattern. The empty chair became part of the restaurant's mystery. "That's for someone who taught me what hunger for approval feels like," I would answer cryptically. "Someone who showed me that the deepest hunger isn't in the stomach." Food bloggers wrote about the empty table. It became a local legend, part of Marjorie's table's identity. Couples would request other tables, not wanting to sit where the mysterious place setting waited. Some people thought it was for a deceased loved one. Others thought it represented all the hungry people in the world. Everyone had their own interpretation, their own meaning they projected onto that empty chair. But I knew the truth. That seat represented the space my mother could have occupied in my success if she had chosen differently. It was the place at my table she would never earn, the forgiveness she could see but never quite reach. The empty seat spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. It was my final statement, permanently on display. Within 2 years, Marjorie's name became synonymous with my success rather than her cruelty. When people heard the name Marjorie Crow now, they thought of the restaurant first, not the woman behind it. That transformation was more satisfying than any revenge I could have planned. Her old friends mocked her quietly at social gatherings. "You're the woman whose cruelty built a chef," someone said at a party, not realizing she could hear. The whispers followed her everywhere. She couldn't show her face without someone recognizing her, connecting her to my story. Meanwhile, my second restaurant opened in another city. Then a third. I was building an empire, and every new location carried the same name, Marjorie's Table. Her name spreading across the country, but meaning my victory instead of her identity. She stopped going out in public eventually. The shame became too heavy. She had wanted to be known, to be important, to matter in her social circles. Now she was known, but for all the wrong reasons. This was the beginning of her silence, the start of her disappearance from the world she once commanded. And I had caused it simply by succeeding, by proving her wrong, by turning her name into my legacy. The best revenge really was success. She had taught me that, though not in the way she intended. 5 years after opening Marjorie's Table, I started a culinary scholarship program for underprivileged teenagers. Half of my restaurant profits funded the program, giving kids from broken homes a chance to pursue their dreams. I stood before a group of scholarship students one evening, looking at their eager faces. Some reminded me of my younger self, hungry for approval and afraid of failure. I wanted them to know what I wished someone had told me. "Never let anyone tell you your passion isn't real," I said, my voice carrying through the classroom. "Not parents, not friends, not anyone who claims to know your limitations. Let your passion burn so bright that eventually they have to taste it." They cheered, and the sound filled something in me that had been empty for too long. This was what success really meant. Not the restaurants or the money or even the vindication. It meant giving others the opportunity one had to fight for alone. These kids wouldn't have to sneak into kitchens after midnight. They wouldn't have to sleep on strangers' couches or burn their hands in kitchens that didn't care about them. They would have support, training, and someone who believed in them from the start. I finally smiled that day, not out of revenge or bitterness, but genuine peace. The weight I had carried for so long began to lift. Maybe healing looked like this, like helping others avoid the pain you survived. One winter evening, an envelope arrived at the restaurant. My name was written in shaky handwriting I recognized immediately. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her words cramped and uneven. "I made your stew tonight," the letter said. "The recipe you tried to serve that terrible night. I followed it exactly as you intended it. It tasted like forgiveness, though I don't deserve it. I'm proud of you, Liam. I should have said that when you were 10. I'm saying it now, even if it's too late." I read the letter 3 times, standing in the empty restaurant after closing. My hands shook slightly. After everything, after all these years, this was what she offered. Not excuses, just acknowledgement and regret. I walked to table 7, the empty seat I kept for her, and placed the letter on the plate. It sat there alone, illuminated by candlelight, representing every complicated feeling I had ever had about family. The camera in my mind panned out, showing Marjorie's Table in full. Laughter and conversation filled the air. The smell of fresh bread and roasted vegetables drifted from the kitchen. Glasses clinked in toasts. Life continued around that empty chair. "Some recipes start with pain," I whispered to the empty restaurant. "But the best ones end with peace." I had built something beautiful from broken pieces. That was enough. That would always be enough.